Hello, and welcome to Soul Aligned CEO Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Mori, and welcome to another solo episode. I'm really diving in this year and very purposefully changing the format a little bit to get back to the basics. And I want to discuss topics that are really near and dear to my heart and that also are what I consider part of my path and kind of continual journey to becoming more soul aligned. And with that, I mean body, soul, mind aligned. So, welcome. So, today's episode has been one that has been on my mind for a very long time. And if I'm being completely transparent, it's a topic that could potentially be triggering. It might feel controversial to some. But to me, though, it's really important that I have these conversations, primarily because sometimes I feel if I had heard others having similar conversations sooner and sharing the information, then maybe just perhaps I might have kind of looked at my life a little differently. So, today's episode, I want to share with you an entire journey, my journey of why I stopped drinking alcohol. Now, interestingly enough, if you follow me on Instagram, both on my personal page and on the podcast page, I often share about different health tips or things that I do to really help me maintain my health at a really maximum capacity. And one of the topics that I get the most messaging on or people commenting to me about is anytime I share anything that has to do with the fact that I no longer drink alcohol. And I would say it's split. You know, a lot of people can relate to my journey. Some people are perhaps maybe curious as to why. And I think other people, for whatever reason, feel a little defensive. So I want to start this episode with kind of two disclaimers, if you'll allow me. So the first is everything that I am going to be discussing in this episode is not medical advice. If you have an interest in understanding more what drinking alcohol, even in the very, very smallest amount, does to you from a physical perspective, I highly recommend starting with Dr. Amen, Amen. He is a wealth of knowledge about this topic and particularly about how alcohol impacts your brain. So I highly suggest you start with him. You can also research things like how does alcohol impact your heart rate variability? Recently, the American Cancer Association published articles referencing alcohol in any amount has a great impact on your risk of developing 7 major cancers. How many of you saw that article? You can also look at how drinking alcohol impacts the white matter and kind of the neuro pathways in your brain. Dr. Amen speaks a lot to that. So, again, I'm not going to go into any medical advice, but it's very easily available. If you are curious, you just need to start looking. So, that's the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is I want to ask you guys to allow me to share my journey authentically as myself. And I'm saying this because as soon as I start speaking on any aspect of this, I want you to kind of remove any biases, remove any judgment about maybe language that I'm choosing or the direction of the conversation. What I'd like to ask is that you simply listen and be open to perhaps a different perspective than one that you have considered. So, thank you. All right. So, I've been thinking about this for a few days now and wanted to try to go about this conversation in a way that makes sense. So, I thought that it would be helpful to start with kind of just my journey with alcohol and my experience drinking. Now, keep in mind, I am 50 years old. Yes, I have been on this planet as a legal adult for many decades. And like many of you, perhaps you started drinking in college. There was college parties, you turned 21. It's kind of a big rite of passage in the United States, to go to a bar and order a drink. And myself, like so many of you, participated in all of that. It was normal, right? To get drunk on the weekends in college, go out to the bars, that you could kind of walk to and drink and, just have a fun time, let loose, right? So I did that. In my 20s, I continued to socially drink, especially when I moved out to Los Angeles in my later 20s. I became a wine connoisseur. And that's something that I never thought that I would become. I was strictly kind of like a vodka girl. But when I lived out in Southern California, I very quickly discovered in social situations that people drink wine. You have a glass of wine or two or a bottle, at dinner. I'd have girls' nights. I'd have people over. We'd have, this is way back in the day, but we would watch Friends on Thursday nights and, have wine night and snacks. And so, yeah, I mean, it was pretty common, right, to drink 2, 3, 4 nights a week. I mean, especially if you were going out to dinner, if you were having people over, you were going, out to parties. And keep in mind, during my late 20s and all through my 30s, and still today, I was running a consulting business. And so, a lot of wining and dining and taking clients out and going to networking events. Pretty much everything in the corporate business world after 5 o'clock revolves around alcohol. So, suffice to say, I participated. Looking back, I don't know that I necessarily participated any differently than any of my peers. I rarely overdrank. I'm such a lightweight that 2 to 3 drinks really had me buzzing and, the life of the party. You can let loose and let your guard down and, have fun. All of those things we associate with having a few drinks, right? So, yeah, that was really my adult experience with drinking alcohol. What I would consider pretty socially acceptable, pretty like quote unquote normal, right? But was it? So that's kind of my background. I drank at happy hours, I drank out with friends. When I was married, my husband and I would have some wine. It was very, very normal. I wouldn't consider myself someone that had to drink every day, but if it was there and other people were drinking, why not? That's what everyone was doing. I honestly never really thought much about it other than I was never going to obviously drink and drive. And that was something that was very important to me. So always took cabs, when Uber became available, always did that. When I lived in Manhattan, it's a little bit different lifestyle. You're walking and taking the subway everywhere. So I had what I would consider a fairly typical relationship with alcohol on a social level. And so thinking about that, I made a list and I was thinking about why do we drink alcohol? Just as I mentioned, it's in a way like a rite of passage. As we turn 21, it's almost celebratory that we in the United States are legal and can go to a bar, can go to a liquor store and buy alcohol. It's almost celebrated. And that's just culturally, at least here, how it is. And then I think as you proceed through your adult life, people drink to relax, to wind down, right? You get out of a really long day of work and it was hectic and stressful, and you just want to take the edge off. You want to be able to kind of let go and not have the day weigh so heavy on you. And so alcohol is a drug. And I think that most people don't think about it like that, but alcohol is obviously doing something physiologically, neurologically, to your body, to your brain. And, that effect is what people are going for. Because I really don't know that many people that are drinking for the taste, right? You might like the bourbon, or you might like the rum and Diet Coke or daiquiri or glass of, Chardonnay or Merlot, but you're drinking most likely, at least I was, for how it made me feel. It made me feel relaxed. It helped me to just let loose, let my guard down. And especially in social situations, I felt like I could fit in better. That, everyone was having a drink, talking, laughing, relaxing. It was just what everyone was doing, or so I thought. And so, sometimes people, can take it to a different level where you're really drinking to cope, where you're drinking perhaps if you're going through a difficult time, because alcohol kind of slows your brain down, right? It takes away maybe the reality that you are encountering, that's difficult. And no judgment. I mean, there's definitely been times in my life where wanted to have a glass or two of wine to just, check out and not have to feel potentially, the pain or hurt or frustration that I was feeling at the time. And then obviously there are people that have a addiction or alcoholism, need to drink, can't function unless they drink. And so I just want to make a distinction because, again, at the beginning, this is why I asked you all for a little bit of grace, because I'm sharing my story. I completely understand that there are varying levels of dependency on alcohol, along with many other substances. And I'm in no way passing any judgment on anyone for any reason. And so I just want to say that again. So for me, the majority of the reason why I would drink is because I felt like that was the thing to do. And looking back, of course, I liked to feel relaxed. Of course, I liked to feel like that edge was taken off. It was a little bit easier to wind down, to kind of let loose, all of those terms that we associate, with just having that drink or two. And so I think it's important, as you continue to listen to this episode, to just reflect a little bit yourself. And there's no good, bad, right, wrong. And I'm in no way recording this episode to say, hey, all you guys out there, you should really stop drinking. That's not the intention. The intention is to share my story because, like I said at the beginning, had I heard someone sharing a story like this sooner, I maybe would have considered not drinking alcohol a lot sooner. So, that is some of the kind of reasons why I thought about why people are drinking alcohol. One thing that I think is really interesting is that if you look up the Arabic term for alcohol, and I won't be able to say it correctly, but it, in essence, means body eating spirit. So think about that for a second. Body eating spirit. We call alcohol spirits, right? And as I've kind of gone on this journey, I have really kind of expanded past the physical impacts of alcohol and have been more recently exposed to the spiritual impacts of drinking alcohol. So we'll talk about all of that. So, why did I stop drinking? When did I stop drinking? And so I want to talk a little bit about this because this was not anything that I planned. It was not as a result of like stumbling upon a book or a podcast or researching. No, this really came out of nowhere. And so I want to take you back a few years to the end of December 2019. So let's just go back. So this is pre-COVID, pre all of the pandemic stuff, so this is the end of December after the holidays, actually coming up on New Year's for 2020. So I was recently going through a divorce and I had moved and I was in a really, I think, challenging space mentally. And the holidays were tough. It was the first, holidays as, a woman going through divorce and very soon to become single. And I was sad. I didn't really find myself like craving alcohol or wanting to drink to forget. But I decided, kind of on a whim, for New Year's weekend to take a trip. And so I took a little bit of a road trip. I live in Florida. And so packed a bag and, decided that I was just going to venture south, use some of my hotel rewards points and just kind of give myself a chance to relax. Now, many of you, if you follow me on social media, might be aware that this time was also a very interesting time for me spiritually. So not only was I going through a very real human experience with my divorce, I was also navigating really, the very deep, dark parts of awakening. And I will share all of this in future episodes because it's the foundation of the book that I'm writing. But the occurrences that I was experiencing, just at a real high level, to give you context, you know, just interaction and exposure to spirits, kind of outer worldly beings, and those types of phenomenon were occurring for me. And it wasn't something that I had sought out. It was very confusing. And for the 6 or so months leading up to kind of where I'm at in the story, I was dealing with all of that on a daily basis. And it was Very, very confusing, is probably the best way to describe it because I didn't have the language to describe what was occurring. Now I do. But so I wanted to kind of set that stage. So I was going through all of that, going through divorce. I had just moved. I'm still running my matrix business. And then I decide, I just need a break. It's a lot. And I was having a really hard time with the constant interaction with what I now know as spirits or guides or angels, because I really was not at a place where I could discern what the messaging really was. And so I ended up stopping in Daytona Beach, one of my favorite beach towns in Florida. And I decided that I was going to spend New Year's weekend, at this cute little beach hotel. They upgraded my room. This was great. This is exactly what I needed because, again, I was just going through a very difficult situation personally. And so, honestly, I wanted to just kind of relax, have some wine, get some chocolate, watch some movies, and not think for a few days. And so the first night at the hotel, I did just that. I remember feeling pretty hungover. I had probably drank, three-fourths of a bottle of wine. I remember pouring out the leftovers the next morning, thinking, that was really stupid of me to have kind of drank that much. And, but at the same time, it kind of allowed me to relax and really just forget what I was dealing with. And so, to be completely honest, my plan for the next night was to do it again. And so this is December 30th now, 2019. And I spent the day outside at the beach, at the pool, and came back, took a shower, and I was going down to the hotel bar again and was going to order something to eat and a bottle of wine to take back up to the room. And as I stood there at the bar, I very succinctly heard stop, almost to the point where I turned to see if someone perhaps behind me was having an argument and they said stop to, the person that they were with. But there was no one around me arguing. Everyone was kind of laughing and, having a good time. And I kind of like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with me? What am I hearing? And so the bartender came with the tray and he had a glass and he had the bottle of wine and he kind of sat it down onto the counter and it kind of like clanked, And at that exact moment of that clank, I heard again, stop. Whoa. Um, it gave me chills because it not only was one of the first times that I could understand this messaging. And it wasn't like I actually heard the word verbally stop. Those of you that kind of understand what I'm talking about, it was the resonance, it was the frequency, and it was very, very clear. And so in that moment, I kind of freaked out and I somehow drew the connection of, the bottle of wine, feeling that resonance of stop. And I was like, okay, fine. I will stop. I don't need to drink tonight. It's not a big deal. So I apologized to the bartender. I said I'd still take the food to go. And I went up to the room. And I remember that night thinking to myself, why why is this coming to me like this? Like this kind of message, and at the time I didn't really have the language to understand, but to stop. And so I was up that whole night, kind of tossing and turning and not really understanding, well, what am I supposed to do now? I had no intention of stopping drinking alcohol forever, but I thought, okay, maybe something somewhere is trying to tell me something. And again, I didn't really understand the magnitude of what I was receiving and where all of that was coming from. So stop. So I did. And there's a greater story, kind of spiritually, that weekend of things that occurred that I will share in a later episode. But the point for this one is that really was the catapult for me to really stop drinking alcohol. Now, in my mind, I really kind of thought about it as I'm going to stop and just figure out all of this stuff. Like, figure out everything that I'm experiencing. And hey, it's probably not a bad idea to actually, be not drinking, kind of finish up going through my divorce, moving, have a clear head, like heal, all of those things. And so I kind of came to the decision that I was going to stop drinking as I was kind of going through this healing process. So that was 2019 into 2020. And so as I proceeded through 2020, I started to feel better. I started to sleep better. I started to have more energy. My skin was looking better. I just felt better. And, then it really occurred to me that, wow, I hadn't been drinking alcohol for 6, 7 months. Maybe this was kind of all related. And so as I proceeded through 2020 and into 2021, I kept noticing all of these just kind of what I would call general health improvements because I wasn't dehydrated anymore. I think one thing that some people don't realize is how very dehydrating drinking alcohol is. Even the littlest amount, what it does to your liver and just all of the organs in your body. And so I got to this point where, as I was approaching my kind of 1 year mark of not drinking alcohol, that I didn't really need it. I thought back through everything that occurred during 2020. And, if I knew what was going to occur during 2020, I don't know that I would have necessarily picked that year to decide to stop drinking. But in hindsight, I'm really glad that I did because it allowed me to have such clarity and such resonance with my focus that, I was able to accomplish a lot and I needed to. I needed to get back on my feet. I needed to feel strong. I needed to feel confident. And, not drinking, wow, it really changed a lot of very simple things for me from a health perspective. And those of you that know me, I eat very clean, very little sugar. I don't eat processed foods. I have a very healthy diet, but I think the piece that was missing was, the alcohol that I was drinking 3, 4 nights a week at different phases of my life, at least 1 or 2 nights a week for the majority of my adult decades. And by removing that, I really could very easily, in that first 6, 7 months, experience and notice enough differences that were grand improvements to my already kind of healthy existence that by the time I reached that year marker, that's when I really made the decision that I don't need to drink anymore. And I haven't gone back. So it's been 5 years and 3.5 months or so. I don't really keep a day counter, but I obviously know that night in Daytona Beach, very specifically and know that that was, the last night that I did drink alcohol. And so that's really been my journey of why did I stop and how initially did it impact me. And I do want to share with you guys that over the last, 5+ years, there really has not been an instance where I thought, oh, I should have a drink. I should go buy a bottle of wine. I should go to a bar. And that's really important because I think one thing that always crosses everyone's mind, if maybe you're considering that you don't want to drink alcohol, is how is this going to impact my life? Because if you think about it, as I referenced sharing just my journey with drinking, it's all very social, right? You go out and have a drink with friends, you have your girlfriends over, especially when you're dating. A lot of first dates are drinks. But really, over the last 5 years, I have not encountered a situation where I felt like this situation would be better if I had a drink. And I know that that may be, um, you know, difficult or challenging to relate to. And again, no judgment. That has just been my experience. And I needed to step away from drinking to realize, hey, I don't need something to relax. I don't need something to take the edge off. I don't need something to have fun. And granted, I have spent many, many years doing deep, deep shadow work, deep healing work on the human level. And I think all of that has really added to this overall perspective. But even in the dating world, I have not found it difficult when sharing that I don't drink and that I would actually prefer if I'm hanging out one on one with someone that they don't drink either. And it's been very interesting to me to encounter so many people that are like, hey, I've really been cutting back too. I really realize, it's not the best. And it hasn't been like this socially scary situation, that maybe me 15 years ago would have thought if you told me, hey, you're going to stop drinking when you are 44 years old. Um, but really, it's been very eye opening. And I've actually found a community, online and actually in real life of other people that have made that decision not to drink alcohol. So I want to right now just have a real quick conversation because I know that there's a connotation of everybody that stops drinking, well, they must be doing that because they're an alcoholic. And again, I'm in no way taking away from anyone's experience that has gone through alcoholism and has dealt with that and needs to kind of think about it in those contexts. But what I'd really like to offer is not everyone that stops drinking does so because they're an alcoholic. Okay. So people stop drinking because they don't want to drink anymore. And whatever level or relationship that they had with alcohol prior, sure, if it feels comfortable and correct to say that you were dealing with something that needs to be labeled, then that's fine. But I find more often than not, people are hesitant to stop drinking because they're afraid of this label of being called an alcoholic. Now, I can speak firsthand, and I told you guys my experience with drinking. I stopped drinking because I didn't want to drink anymore after I had gone through that whole year of not drinking and feeling the most energy and the most wonderful that I had felt in decades. And so I chose to stop drinking, not because, hey, I felt like I had um, something that I needed to deal with. Now, stopping drinking definitely helped me have a clearer mind and allowed me to heal. But I think you get what I'm saying, right? It's like the stigmas and the labels and the fear around all of that. It's been really interesting to me to have conversations with people that are afraid to stop drinking because they don't want people to think that they're an alcoholic. And so I just want to say it again. Not everyone that stops drinking does so because of alcoholism. And you can choose to stop drinking anytime you want. You really can. And here's the other thing that I'd like to offer is that you can stop drinking. A lot of people do a dry month, either dry February or whatever month. Pick a month. And I really suggest you do it for a full 4 weeks because you'll really notice the detox and the difference. And then decide, then maybe you're someone that drinks occasionally. But if you are someone who no longer wants to drink socially, listen to this episode again. Share it with people that you care about because I want to give you permission to stop drinking if you don't want to. You really don't have to worry about what anyone else thinks because in my perspective now, after all of the research that I have done, and I listed off at the beginning of the episode some references, it's one of the single most beneficial things that you can do for your health. And in my opinion, that means not drinking at all. In someone else's opinion, it might be having 1 or 2 drinks a year, one a month. You decide. You decide what's right for you. But I want to give you permission to be okay with if you don't want to drink anymore. You don't socially have to. And I wish that someone would have told my 28-year-old or 35-year-old or 38-year-old self, you don't have to drink to fit in. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You choose what's right for you. And I, would have chosen differently. So I'm trying to be that voice now. If you've ever had a curiosity and have wanted to, cut back, give it a try. You can always go back, but you'll never know potentially how great you might feel until you try it. So I also want to just offer myself up, if anyone is considering it and has any worries or has any concerns, definitely feel free to message me privately on Instagram. I'm happy to have any conversations with you. I will say though, again, in no way medical advice. And you have to figure out what's right for you based on how much you're consuming alcohol now. I do not know anything about, people withdrawing from alcohol, anything like that. And so I do just want to stress to please be careful. Obviously speak to medical professionals that you trust if you have any concerns about stopping and wanting kind of a plan to do so. But I just want to let all of you know that it's okay and you don't need to drink if you don't want to. So I appreciate you guys listening. I know this was a longer episode, and I just want to start sharing more openly about things in my life that have really been a huge part of my overall alignment. And again, I know this podcast is called Soul Aligned CEO. I started it with the intention of really focusing on entrepreneurship. And that's a very important aspect of my life. And I do plan to continue to have guests and other people on the show, talking about being soul aligned from their perspective. But I do want to broaden this path that we're on to include things like what I shared today. And I really feel like all of us here on this human crazy journey are stumbling across each other and becoming connected very purposefully. We are all here to walk each other home. So it is my utmost honor that you have given me your time and that you are listening to the episode. The support of the podcast means the world to me as I continue to kind of expand into other directions this year. It means so much if you could rate the show and like it wherever you listen to podcasts. And it's also on YouTube. If you could subscribe, that means the world to me. I'm going to start doing live events later this summer. And as always, please follow along and interact on Instagram. I really appreciate all of you. So thank you. I hope that, some part of this episode really either helped you or inspired you, or maybe even just gave you something, to consider. And that was really the whole point of this episode. I wanted to share my journey with why I stopped drinking alcohol, to just put it out there. And so that if someone else is maybe considering that, they can have a firsthand story of someone that did. So thank you for listening. Until next time, I wish you much peace, love, and joy as you pursue being soul aligned.